Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm the managing editor at Worn and Wound. Really happy to be joined today by a guest Worn and Wound contributor, Cait Bazemore. Cait is making her debut on the Worn and Wound podcast. Cait, it is great to finally have you here on the podcast. Thanks for coming.
I'm so happy to finally be here. Long time in the making. We like a long lead.
Yeah, no, it was kind of like months in planning. We wanted to make sure that we had the right project to discuss, I think, and we definitely have it. We're going to be mainly talking about a piece you've spent quite some time working on that just went live today as we record. It'll be online for about a week or so by the time this episode drops. We're going to be talking about your experience with Biwi, the strap and materials kind of manufacturer. You'll tell us all about that a little bit later. Before we get started, we always do a quick wrist check before we talk watches. So what are you wearing today, Cait?
Yes. Well, for anyone who's read this story at this point, I did strategically choose what is on my wrist today in relationship to the story. So I am wearing a Norcane Adventure Sport 37 millimeter with a rubber strap. Spoiler alert, by our friends at Biwi. I think this piece is maybe like a little over $2,000, and I love it so much. I'm a big white watch person, so this colorway I really enjoy, not just in summer as we're approaching, but all seasons. Yeah,
it looks great, and Norcane factors heavily into this story that you wrote about Biwi. That's how Biwi first came on my radar, but I think what we'll find out is that they've been around for a lot longer than Norcane, and they've done a lot, kind of like outside the realm of Norcane and Nortec, which perhaps they're most famous for now. But we'll definitely get to that. I'm wearing my Ming Uni today,
nice.
Also on a rubber strap. I wanted to make sure I wore something on rubber to kind of like celebrate Biwi and be somewhat relevant. I have no idea where this rubber strap is made. Could be Biwi, could be elsewhere. One of the interesting things about Biwi is that they're involved in like so many things. I imagine you had to sign all kinds of NDAs and things to like keep what they're actually doing there a secret, because they're one of these huge firms that works with so many different brands.
I absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as we were kind of preparing for, what we might chat about today, you had thrown out to me like, what surprised you most? And like walking in there, I was surprised. I mean, not just in the watch category, in other accessory categories and more utilitarian categories. Think of anywhere you see, not that they're exclusively working with rubber, but when you think of those type of materials, sneakers, vegan handbags, I was astounded at the number of brands that I saw that like the title of the story says, that they're just kind of quietly working in the background to produce some really incredible stuff for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, before we get too down far the Biwi rabbit hole, I want to make sure our listeners are properly introduced to you. I'm sure many of them have seen your articles and read your byline, maybe without even realizing, who you are, within the watch community. You've been around for a while, kind of like writing about watches and covering the industry. Can you tell us a little bit about, your interest in watches and how you got into this, and what was your path to kind of finding a niche writing about watches specifically?
Yeah. I feel like my story is maybe a little atypical from a lot of people that I know who got in this space, in that it really started as a job I fell into. Like, I had no real previous passion for watches, no like family history of watch collecting to speak of. I was an English and creative writing major. I had no idea what I was going to do with that after college. But I went to an alumni event and met a person by the name of Hamilton Powell. We went to the same college, and he had just founded a company called Crown and Caliber. I'm from Atlanta
Mhm.
originally, so based there. And one thing led to another, and I ended up being the 8th employee that they hired there in 2012. I was actually not hired to do writing for them. That was a bit secondary. The primary focus, getting things up off the ground, was acquisition, sort of an acquisitions team, and then a team that was like running all of the numbers to build a database of how they were going to value and subsequently price things. I guess I should clarify for those who were not familiar with Crown and Caliber and its series of business. They were what I consider to be one of the kind of like earlier to market pre-owned retailers before that secondary market really has evolved. And but as a team of 8 people, we were wearing many hats. So even though my official title was in acquisition, both with like collectors and partnering with brands and jewelry stores and things like that, they needed a website.
Mhm.
And I started out even just kind of simply doing like product descriptions and landing pages, but then they ended up expanding into a blog. And that was the first place that I got a byline. And as I'm sure many of you have experienced yourself, it's pretty easy to catch the bug once you
Mhm.
start diving down the road of this industry. And I was very fascinated by these objects, but was very much learning on the job. It was like a new language to me, quite literally, some of the
For sure.
terminology. But I saw this flicker of what I could do with my passion for writing and what I had studied in a professional capacity. After about a year, I was really eager to leave Georgia, where I had spent the first 20 some odd years of my life, and just wanted to kind of be doing more writing. And that still wasn't my full-time role there. So I ended up leaving and setting out at that time. So this is 2013 as a freelance writer. They agreed to be my first client, and allowed me to keep supporting them with content. My first like 5 or so years freelancing, I was absolutely not niched into watches. I kept my work with them, but when you're in your 20s and you're freelancing, you'll take any job you can get, really. But as their business started to grow, I attracted in a couple other clients in the watch industry. And again, after about like 5 or 6 years, I really intentionally started niching into the watch space.
Mhm.
And I was very interested in being there, and that's what I wanted to do. So again, for the past like 5 or 6 years, I have been fortunate enough to build exactly what I hope to build in this
Yeah.
space. Yeah.
Yeah. It strikes me that just like kind of like thinking back through like, my own sort of like watch history and like I can remember when Crown and Caliber launched and it was like a pretty like innovative company at the time. The way that they provided, like I think they were like probably the first to like just to like provide such a quick turnaround on on valuations, and they sent you the box with the with the label already on it. It was just like very user friendly and easy, and like I can remember that time, and like that seems to me like a like the right time to kind of like get into watches, in this way. I would imagine getting into writing about watches would be a very different experience now, for someone, like just coming in. They have a whole different set of social media apps that they would have to,
Totally.
master and deal with. That was kind of like a more I don't know, maybe like a more innocent time when like it was not as like ingrained through our like social media lens, and things were just, I think, a little bit more open, and it seemed like there was there's a lot of possibility
Yeah.
back then. So like that, it kind of makes sense that you would like find a niche in watches like through that experience. Was there like do you remember if there was like a particular watch or a particular like assignment where it like clicked and you were like, oh, this is kind of like where I want to this is where I want to stay. This is like the niche that I want to like kind of develop.
Um, hmm. That's a really good question. I mean, Okay, so there's a few things that immediately come to mind. One, when I would try to explain this world and my growing fascination to other people in my personal life who still to this day can't fully make sense of what this whole community is about. I would say, because people would be like, oh, like you're just writing about products. And when I started growing Crown and Caliber's blog, I was like, you don't realize how many things watches touch. And I was like, through the lens of watches, I have learned about aspects of history in a different way than I ever did in school. And in fact, it was like more exciting through the lens of watches than how I was learning about it in textbooks in school. Like cultural significant things, whether related to fashion or, music. And to me, it's like all of the things that watches touch and getting into those moments through what we were exploring through the more like storytelling aspects, that was extremely cool to me, again, especially as a creative writer that like wants to, have a narrative. But I will also share that I picked what is still to this day my number one Grail watch. And I remember making this discovery for myself that I loved this watch so much in that year that I was working in-house at Crown and Caliber. And, brace yourselves, everyone, you're going to have an opinion about it. But it's the Franck Mueller Crazy Hours.
Oh, yes. You've told me about this before.
Yes,
yeah.
I'm sure I've told you about this. And specifically the Color Dreams one. So I love, in case it's not clear by that choice, I love something non-traditional. I love the colors. I loved learning about the functionality that it took to have, that kind of jumping hours display with the hours not being in the chronological order that we're typically used to seeing. And I liked that it was again, like a square case rather than a round case. So all of that to say, early on, I established in my watch journey that I like the things off the beaten path. So
yeah, I think that I feel like that's something that a lot of folks kind of in the watch media space like eventually sort of like come to. I have this theory that it's because we just keep getting press releases for watches that are kind of like the same thing over and over and over again. And, like those watches are important to the industry. Like people have to sell black dial dive watches in order to sustain a business. But like when that's a watch that like you literally see, come up in your inbox every single day, like you kind of get drawn to other things like like the Crazy Hours. You found it early. It sounds like, but like I've really, if you look at my watch box right now, it's full of like unusual colors and case shapes and kind of interesting materials and other things. And I find that like that's what sort of keeps me excited about watches, is like finding things that are off the beaten path, things that are a little different. I love the Crazy Hours too. I think that's a really like that watch was really like a sensation like in its day.
Yeah.
Like it was a big deal, and like it was like the watch that like if you were a celebrity, like you had to be like seen in that watch. And it was also like mechanically interesting. And I think that I think Frank Miller is having a renaissance. Like I think that people are starting to appreciate those watches a little bit, but maybe it'll be even a little bit more widespread at some point.
Because they're borderline vintage at this point.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
because we're getting old.
yeah, we're borderline vintage at this point, which is terrifying. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about like drilling in even deeper, and maybe related to another piece that you wrote. Is there like a particular like type of craft or like there's something in the industry that is like uniquely exciting to you? I think that like
yeah, of course. Well, and of course again, you know the answer and where we're going to go with this, but yeah, like giving a little bit more insight into my journey in this space, like I'll be real, and again, maybe members of the community can relate to this. Like in a lot of those early years when I was still learning so much, I was always so intimidated by predominantly guys who could speak so deeply about technical elements, and they see a model and they knew exactly what the movement was for that. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I've got to emulate that. And of course, now that I've been in this space for over a decade, I can intelligently talk about the technical side of things, but I really came at peace with the fact, like, I'm not someone who's going to have reference numbers memorized.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not someone who's going to see a model and have the movement memorized without turning over the case back. That's not going to be my expertise. And so it is very much, as I started to get deeper into what I sometimes consider to be the underappreciated side of watches, which is the artistic craft aspect, that is where I found my passion and my niche and what I wanted to really nerd out about. And I really credit that to being on a press trip where I got to go hands-on with craft. And to anyone out there, whatever your interest is, if it's something artistic, if it's something mechanical, like, find a workshop and get your hands into it, and you will unravel, a whole new appreciation. And so I got to do a 1-day enameling workshop with a woman named Vanessa Lecci. She's done work for Louis Vuitton, Parmigiani, and I fell in love, and she told me that I had some natural talent. And I was like, cool, like, how could I explore this when I go back to New York? And she was like, nope, you'll come back and train with me. And I was like, ha ha ha, like, okay. And she proceeded to go to lunch with myself and the other journalists that were on the trip at another point. And she kept saying, okay, so you're going to come back and train with me. And I was like, okay, I think she's really serious. And literally, I think it was like months later, we made that happen for a full week. And I've trained with her now on a few different occasions, as well as another enamel artist named Maëlle Constant, who did the work on Renaud Tixier's piece in their movement, actually. So that was quite interesting. I got to actually recreate that exact piece that she did in the movement, as opposed to more kind of dial side work. But enameling quickly opens you up and goes very hand in hand with guilloche. And then you go down that road. I've done a workshop in that, not an apprenticeship as much, but just a workshop. And then you look at movement finishing, which I'm like, okay, so if there's something I can get interested in on the technical side, it's like, I got to do some hands-on with perlage, which again kind of echoes guilloche. And so that is the rabbit hole of watchmaking that I have gone down. And, I even kind of teasing out what we'll talk about later with Biwi, even though it's, again, a little more technical leaning than artistic leaning, I got to do some hands-on work at their HQ as well, with some of the finishing techniques that go into the rubber straps. And if someone tells me you're going to get to go hands-on and actually practice like a technique that is used by one of the many, 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 many hands that touches these objects before they reach our wrists, I'm all about it. And I could really seriously see myself leaving behind a career of writing one day to pursue one of these crafts. So
yeah. No, that's so cool that you were able to kind of like discover like a new talents, like, through your work in the watch industry. Enameling is something that's always fascinated me. I love a great enamel dial. I've always been sort of like, they're just incredibly beautiful. Like they're easy to, it's easy to enjoy, an enamel dial. You wrote a fantastic piece for us on the 5280 watch company, which is a literally like less than a year old watch brand, based in Colorado, that does these enamel dials like unlike anything I've seen before. With their enamel that then have like a guilloche pattern engraved into them with a rose engine in the style of a Fabergé egg. Just like a really just a really creative project. Really cool idea. Before we finally get into Biwi, tell us just a little bit about like the reporting out of that story and what you learned and how that sort of like why 5280 was kind of like a fun experience for you to research.
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of, not that it's as easy to reduce enameling to this of like, you've seen one, you've seen them all. But I think, kind of what you were alluding to earlier of like, once you're in this space for so long, you see so many things. And so when something is really unique, it jumps out at you. Like, of course, like my entry point to enamel work was with big brands who have done it well historically and very traditionally. But discovering like a new upcoming brand that is tackling this art form. And I will credit you, let it be known, I did not discover this brand. Zach brought them to me knowing my interest in this world. And their artisan who is doing both the guilloche and enamel, Bill Brinker, I interviewed him for that story on 5280. And, his journey into this world is incredible. Spoiler alert, it started when he was like 12 or 13 years old in his junior high school. There was a jewelry making class. And at this young age, just again, had this affinity and talent for it. And I mean, that has, led into a career of decades and decades. Not only are the watches in the style of Fabergé eggs, but in fact, he had the privilege of working with the man who is considered America's Fabergé, and really brought that, expertise and know-how to the watches that they're producing. And, again, this art form can be kind of highly revered in limited edition pieces that are very costly, and they are finding a way to make this beautiful technique accessible to more people without compromising how they're executing it. And in our beautiful conversation, he was generous enough to tell me that I am welcome to, for us to coordinate and find a time to work in his studio and to train with him. And there's a chance that could even happen this year. And we've
awesome.
talked about doing a follow-up story around that. So like, stay tuned. Go read that story if you have not. And, and the last thing I would say is I encourage people. I think some people, they hear enamel, they hear artistic craft, and that's not their thing. And they want to tune out and, just like give it a chance. Like, I think there's, again, more to it than maybe people think at a surface level. Like, I think one last thing I'll say about 5280 that I think is really interesting that they're doing is solid colors. People immediately think that the very elaborate cloisonné and these things are the epitome of enamel. And believe me, cloisonné is extremely difficult to execute in its own right. But getting a solid color uniform and produced not just a piece unique, but a series piece is massively challenging. Not to be discounted for, again, very artistic pieces you see with multiple colors and multiple layers. So yeah, they're really doing beautiful work.
Yeah, I was so glad to be able to, like, everything just sort of lined up for that story. It's one of those cases where like the right subject like meets the right writer for it. And definitely go read that piece on 5280. I'll make sure it's linked in the show notes if folks haven't read it. But just I'm looking forward to the follow up. I think that'll be a cool one to return to at some point when you can have even more time in person with their enameler. I think that'll be great. Okay, Biwi. So let's talk about Biwi at a very high level. Tell us like what is Biwi, and how did the opportunity to visit with them and talk to them about their business come about, because this is not a company that does a lot of press. If you start kind of like searching the internet for Biwi stories, like there's a couple stories out there, and mostly like European watch publications in French often, but they don't talk to people like us very much. So if you could kind of give us like a high level overview of what Biwi is and tell us how you got in, that would be great.
Yeah. So at a high level, they are essentially, a producer of components that go into watches. So they're not, and again, components for lots of things beyond watches. That's just one of their, I think, like primary industries that they serve. But in the watch realm, they're not producing watches themselves, but just various components. And maybe not obviously, but they didn't start in rubber straps. They started producing kind of all different types of internal components for cases. I can't remember if there were some for movements. I detail some examples in the story, but it was then really in the 80s, when the brand was officially established. I think the first generation, because it's now in the third generation of business, but the first generation, the business was maybe a little more amorphous in the first couple of decades, but it was kind of at this time when it really started to grow and thrive. They solidified the name Biwi and kind of went full force into this rubber strap game and kind of more innovative, futuristic, if you will, materials, and Norcane and the development of Nortec, even though that came, again, like a couple decades after they started to get into that space, but really propelled them. And to your point, I think Norcane has also been most like vocal about their work with them, where
Right.
again, a lot of other brands are more quiet about it or like will not disclose at all that they're in partnership. So there's kind of varying degrees in that respect. So it was actually literally almost a year ago at the Couture show in Las Vegas. So I cover jewelry as well, and that's the primary focus of that trade show. But there are a few watch brands there as well, and Norcane is one of them. And I have a great relationship with them. I love the team. If you want to, if it's important to you to know the perspective of I'm not just buying the watch, I'm buying the brand. They're a really beautiful team of people. And at the end of the show, I think it was like the last night, I think that we were all in town. We went out to have a little fun in Vegas, and, some beautiful drinks were involved.
Sure. Yeah.
And we really just started kind of nerding out about Nortec, and they were telling me like more than I ever wanted to know about Nortec. And Biwi came up, and I was like, I've never heard that, at the time I had never heard this name. And again, we just kind of like got to talking more. And, even if it was promises made under the influence, they ultimately did come to fruition, because they were like, I bet we can like hook you up with them somehow. Like, I bet we could arrange something. Like, I think there's a story here. And again, even in the light of day, the next day, we were able to make that happen. I think it was about 3 months later when I was knew I was going to be in Switzerland for Geneva Watch Days, and we were able to coordinate at that time for me to go there. And yes, like I don't want to completely speak for Biwi, but I've been led to believe that I'm one of very few journalists that they have let pass through their doors and really see the underbelly. And they trusted me with a lot of information, not only to tell this story well, but keep confidentiality that they want to keep with their clients, which I have nothing but the utmost respect for, being the subtle force working in the background. So
Yeah. It's nice when those like story ideas that are discussed like late night, like over drinks, actually like come to fruition. I sometimes think like if all those stories actually like were written, like we'd have like just like such a surplus of material. So it's nice to hear that you're giving me hope that it is possible to create something like out of those late night discussions at a trade show. I can remember like around this time, like when you came to me with the pitch for the Biwi story, and you were like so incredibly like excited about it, and you thought that it was like you knew it was like a really good one. What made you think that? Like, why were you excited to write this story in particular?
I mean, first and very candidly, as problematic as I think exclusivity and gatekeeping can be in the industry, it's like when someone gives you an opportunity that not a lot of people are being given, like you want to take them up on
Mm-hmm.
that. But really, as much as, again, I do respect their sort of philosophy of being this force in the background and the brands that they're creating for their products and those brands shine. If it were up to me, every individual from top to bottom at every factory tour that I've been to would, have their face and their name celebrated. Again, to me, one of the most incredible things about these objects is the number of hands
Mm-hmm.
that touch these components that go into these objects. And it is, my old soul just like sings for this aspect of things, work by hand, people that really embrace the label and title of craftsperson is, a lost thing in our world in so many places. And so for them to have some willingness to open up about the work that they're doing in the background, like, I think that those people do deserve to be celebrated and have a platform just as much as the brand names that hold so much weight. So when somebody gives me that opportunity to really show how multifaceted it is, and that there's a lot of people that deserve really credit and recognition, those are stories that I want to tell.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about craft as it relates to Biwi, who, at the end of the day, like they make rubber straps and they make, like, as you said, like other
Really like
components.
utilitarian things.
Yeah, like you think of a rubber strap, like I'm wearing a watch with a rubber strap, like it is sort of like utilitarian, it's like, it's sporty, it's made to be like sweat into, it's made to like, be like a robust thing. And usually when we think of craft, we think of like we were talking about with 5280, like artisanal dials and, guilloche and, like things that are beautiful and made by hand. But that's not the only type of craft that that exists. And I think that one of the interesting things about, that comes through in the story and just like in the conversation we're having is that like there's craft everywhere, like people, like real people make these things, at the end of the day. And then I think I agree. That's something that's worth celebrating for sure.
I mean, and not to be, like overstating it. Of course, you go to the story and the lead image is of a kind of
Factory
very
floor,
sterile, futuristic, and absolutely today, not just at Biwi, but again, nearly every factory tour I've gone to, it is very much the marriage of technology available, machinery and the artisans. There's very much a push and pull and yin and yang with those things working together. But, in that same vein of like, yes, Biwi was a very industrial complex that they are working out of. But when I got to those hands-on finishing techniques of What happens when something kind of comes from the injection mold,
Mm-hmm.
say, and then how it's, finished by smoothing and shaping and making sure, all those holes are going to function properly for you, and all of the connection points, depending on, how the strap is making its contact with the case.
Yep.
That's when I got to have real conversation with some of the people that worked there. And there is then that warmth and like down to earthness of, even though we're all in like our lab coats, but where there's still this very like human personal touch going into these objects, just as much as the machines are facilitating in the ability to develop this breadth of patents and materials and ways to use them. So it's like, art and science, which to me is the beauty of watches altogether, right? It's mechanics and art.
Yeah, for sure. Did it remind you? I mean, you've been on your shared manufacturer tours. Was the facility like similar to you in some ways to like a sort of like what we would think of as a typical watch manufacturer? You got like big machines over here doing one thing, and like people kind of like at tables and another place, like working with their hands on other things. Like, did it kind of have a similar sensibility about it, or was there something like different and distinct about like the Biwi experience compared to say like a big watch manufacturer that you might have visited?
Yeah, I mean, on like simply stated, it was quite similar.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the nuances, I mean, listen, when I first arrived, I felt like I had, the royal treatment. There was like a welcome Cait Bazemore up on their like rotating screen right when I walked in. And before I got to the underbelly, I was just ushered into a room that was like the Biwi candy store of, again, products across industries that they had created. And that's where my jaw was immediately dropping at all of the brands that they've worked with and products that they've had a hand in, that just kind of blew me away and gave me some context to finish products. But again, as you can maybe tell through my interest in craft, and with my background as a creative writer, I'm like, so interested in the process, not just the finished product. So it was like, great, how did we get here? The only other major difference I would say, which again, we kind of quote throughout the story, some of the square meters that these facilities of where it started and then kind of a first round of growth and where they're at now. And the scale of these facilities are massive.
Yeah.
So even like, for instance, in that so-called finishing department where it was kind of more like workbenches and people get their tray of this particular thing and they get into that zone for that product piece or whatever. Yes, I've seen that kind of setup before, but the scale of this one was definitely bigger than, again, some of the like warm and cozy Swiss chalet kind of workshops that I've been in before. So, again, like this place is significant. And it's, again, it's quite out in the country. It was like my first journey was a train to Norcane, which is kind of near like BLBN. And then Biwi, we then took a car out to Biwi, which is even further out. I believe it's kind of closer to the border and a bit further north. And so again, like it's one of these places for, this is just my assumption. They didn't really quote me any facts on this, but I'm sure what they have done for the job market, like in more of the countryside, is got to be phenomenal with the growth that they've had and the scale that they are serving people.
Yeah, it seems like they're a pretty big player. All things considered. You mentioned your jaw being on the floor when you see like all the different things they're making for a bunch of brands. There are a couple that are mentioned in the article. Hublot for one, at least early on, they made rubber straps for Hublot, and then Richard Mille, they made early rubber straps for Richard Mille. Are you able to tell us like who else they're working with besides Norcane, obviously, or are you sworn to secrecy on that?
I'm pretty sure everyone I mentioned in the story is kind of everyone that I am able to mention. I'm trying to think of a few of the others that were mentioned in the story off the top of my head. Now they're kind of, you named a few, Richard Mille seemed like a significant kind of early player for them.
I mean, even those three brands, like that
Yeah.
gives you a sense of like the breadth of like, the types of things that they're making, or like the types of brands that they're working with. You have, like different levels of, like accessibility in terms of price, right there. Obviously Richard Mille is like way at the top, and, Norcane, a little bit more accessible. Hublot's somewhere in the middle. So
totally. And I think, the other thing to point out, and again, this is where some of my technical recall is going to escape me, but I urge you to dig into the story. Those of you out there listening, if you haven't read it yet, where it's not just the rubber straps. Even for some of these brands that we've mentioned, there are other components like Nortec that, where it's an injection made into the pusher that is serving some kind of purpose, or, even one of the rubber straps, I believe, and you see this a lot with their work with Nortec and Norcane as well, of like the color application that they are able to do that is beyond what a lot of other makers have been able to kind of, again, chemically and with whatever magic, and like, let it be known, as much detail as I learned about Nortec, there was very much a plateau where they were like, and anything else that we tell you is the secret sauce that's like, like not leaving the room of the people that have created it. So all to say that, again, I think it's like 14 different patents that they have and counting, I'm sure. Spoiler alert to the end of the story, there is more to come with their work with Norcane, and, an anniversary year that will come up for Norcane in a few years. And the goal for them is beyond Nortec to have a few other proprietary materials in each of the new collections that they'll be launching for this anniversary year, like a new proprietary material in each that's all being developed in partnership with Biwi. So they are not slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah. That's a good transition, I think, to talk about some of the people that you spoke with and that you quoted, in the article. There are really like three main figures here. There's Ben Kufer, who's one of the founders of Norcane and kind of like is guiding that brand. Pascal Burcard, I think is his name, the gentleman who runs Biwi.
You're pronouncing his last name as well as I can. Apologies, Pascal, if we're not pronouncing your last name correctly.
Good to know. And then, of course, there's Jean-Claude Biver, who sits on the board at Norcane and kind of is the connective tissue between Biwi and Norcane. The first thing I want to ask you about, the people aspect of this, is Biwi's a family-owned company, and I'm just wondering if you had any sense of the company culture there, being family owned for I think 3 generations at this point. That's not uncommon in the watch space, but I do think that there's a clear differentiator. You can tell, when a company has been sold off to the conglomerates and when it's still family owned. So what does that kind of mean for Biwi from what you were able to see there?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just kind of speaking to the family leadership, as I understand it, Pascal is really responsible for this massive growth and success that the company has seen. I think he kind of took what his father and grandfather laid the foundation for and was like, we can push the bounds of this even further, and really saw a lot of opportunity and, again, kind of maybe a perfect storm of events in the industry at large, with the growth of sport watch and in the broader fashion category, that push and pull between casual can be haute couture, sneakers and jeans can still be elevated in luxury. And I think, he had a smart eye for seeing the potential that they had, and some trends or whatnot in the industry, and just was like, let's go full force into that. And so I think that is an important piece just from that vantage point. Again, like, I had nothing but the loveliest experience with employees working there. I believe some of whom had gone through, a couple of generations of the company, and that even at scale, that retention has been there, and that, an emphasis on people that kind of share Pascal's passion and vision. Again, it's like the sum of all parts that have made this possible. And I think him like surrounding himself with the people needed to expand his family business in the way that he saw it could. So yeah, I very much, again, I mean, this is my opinion, but I would imagine that they get offers, from people, and that there could have very well been opportunity. It would be hard for me to imagine not, when you're a successful business, that people are not knocking at your door in that way. And yet it seemed important to them to keep things, even with growth, keeping things intimate in that way.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. Jean-Claude Biver, very kind of like dynamic and important figure in the watch world. It's always fun to get a quote from Jean-Claude Biver for your story. Talk about his sort of like, place in all of this, and what did you learn from him, and how he kind of like sees Biwi and the relationship between Biwi and Norcane.
Yeah, I mean, I will absolutely would never, ever, ever want to discredit in any way the genius that is Jean-Claude Biver, but I will kind of correct something that you alluded to earlier, where actually Ben was the one that bridged the gap between
Gotcha. Okay.
So, and again, it's detailed very beautiful. I mean, Pascal was nearly like emotional, recalling some of the trajectory to me. And you'll see that come through in the story. But Ben was the one kind of in the middle. He and Pascal had, kind of brushed shoulders. And then it sounds like really deepened an incredible friendship, as well as brainstorming how their businesses could converge throughout the pandemic. And it was like kind of around that same time that Norcane and Jean-Claude Biver were coming together of, how could he get involved, and potential that he saw in the brand and what they could do together. And in those discussions between Ben and Jean-Claude, he was really encouraging this idea around material development to kind of take what Norcane was doing in the realm of like sport watches to the next level. And Ben was like, I know the guy that we need to talk to. So he set this meeting, but Pascal did not know that Jean-Claude Biver was going to be there. And I think, again, like Hublot was one of the early brands kind of at the forefront in the rubber strap game, and like making this cool and elevated while also still utilitarian. And obviously Jean-Claude has major ties to Hublot. And so, Ben was like, Pascal, lit up when Jean-Claude came into the room, and I surprised him in this way. And immediate synergy, and as I'm told, immediate synergy and develop of Nortec and the Wild One started like that day. And, I think, I will be transparent. I did this interview to get these quotes with Jean-Claude remotely, but I had gotten to meet him in person on a panel that he was on like shortly before that. And And he said this thing in that panel that clicked with me. And I was like, this is going to be the jumping off point for how I want to dig into this work with Biwi and Norcane. Is he said something to the effect of really believing that material innovation is going to be kind of like the legacy of the next generation of watchmakers that are rising up. And obviously, that feels so tangibly evident through the work that he has been a part of and helped facilitate with this brand and this maker. And, again, like, he is a very smart and assured person with a lot of history to back that up, and says things with a lot of matter of factness and clarity. Yeah. So I tend to want to listen to him and believe him that this is going to be an important, continue to be an important part of the future of watchmaking.
Yeah, I think that idea that you present in the story, like, it really jumped out at me. That this idea that like materials innovation is like the next frontier, of this, and that it's not necessarily like chronometry, which is, I think, driven the industry forward, for like literally centuries, like at this point. So yeah, that's like just like a very fascinating idea, that, and I think like a jumping off point for like a follow up, piece at some point. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. What else do you want to like kind of leave people with when it comes to Biwi? Like what other kind of like big picture or small picture things should people know about your experience there?
I think, to me, again, if I'm like even tying this back to like the broader context of craft, is, I'm going to kind of like, if any part of this video makes sense, I'm taking off my watch to kind of show it and examine it. Like, it's easy to look at this finished product. It's easy to look at this object holistically. And I think, this piece does not have Nortec in it, my Norcane model. But, this, to me, like, I will never look at a rubber strap the same way again. And Biwi does not do branding or any marking. And I don't know if I'm savvy enough to be able to identify one of their straps, like, beyond the brands that I tucked away in my memory. But, it's definitely made me look at rubber straps differently. It makes me want to analyze them and see if I can guess if it was made by Biwi. And, again, if you look at a wild one and you see the application of Nortec within the case, if you start to pick apart these objects, again, I mentioned in one of the other applications, they used a material in a component of the crown. There may have even been another one in a bezel as well. And it's like, I just urge you to almost like do a meditation on all the different aspects of your watch and like really look at it. So often we're just like, oh, like the time, or, oh, that matched my outfit today, I'm throwing it on. And if you're used to wearing something on your wrist every day, like, you almost don't even like notice that it's there because you're just so used to feeling that weight. But like, don't forget those moments to, and I hope that anyone out there with a rubber strap, like, go do some crazy visual and tactile analysis of your rubber strap and like appreciate it in a new way. And I think especially like utilitarian components like this can actually get more overlooked. If you have a really beautiful enamel dial watch, you probably are going to spend a lot of time like staring at that dial and looking at it in different light and watching it reflect and all those things. But it's like something that just makes your day at the pool, easier. You might not think about as much, but again, like, I can't emphasize enough, the thought and care and knowledge and attention to detail that goes into every aspect of these, even that might seem like something simple, like it's just a rubber strap that feels great in the summer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really, that's an important point to remember. I think for all of us, like every component of a watch has to be like conceived of like by a human being, and like either, not everything is necessarily made by a human being, but they have to come up with the idea. And it's like,
and it's years in the making, by the way. This is not like, oh, we had this idea and like 3 months later we're pushing this project out. Like,
exactly.
no, it's years.
Yeah. Yep. And like, I think that like we've all probably had the experience of like something small, like kind of like not being ideal, like in a watch. Like I think of like the Tang buckles, like on a, like, on a strap, just like, it's like the size of those is sometimes they're a little too big, sometimes they're a little too small. And like, it's just like not a great experience. And like someone has to like think through that and like make them the right size for that strap and for that watch and for your wrist. And there's so many like variables that go into it. And like it's important to consider like these things. Don't take those rubber straps for granted. And I think with rubber straps in particular, like I know like our audience for sure, like they have like real thoughts on rubber straps. Like, there's a lot of,
I know. I'm waiting for all the, on the story, on the socials, on this podcast. I'm waiting for the comments.
It'll come. It'll come, I'm sure. But like I've spent so much time just like debating, with my colleagues, like the pros and cons of like different types of rubber straps. And like there are people on our team who like do not like rubber straps at all. And there are people on our team like me. Like I really like, I wear rubber straps all summer. I swear by them. So it's interesting rabbit hole for sure to go down. And Cait, you did a great job kind of reporting the story. I'm so glad that we were able to feature it on the website.
Me too.
And thank you so much for coming on to talk all things Biwi. Before I let you go, we do cultural recommendations at the end of each podcast. I asked you to prepare one or two. I think you said you had a couple.
I do.
I'll go first. I have a really quick one.
Yes.
That is, I think might be of interest to you. It's a podcast called The Press Box, hosted by Brian Curtis. It's a Ringer podcast. I just recently, I'm coming off a lot of travel. We went to the Wind Up Watch Fair in San Francisco, and I had like a lot of delays like throughout like every step of the, so I was just like killing podcasts, like going back into
That's the only way to survive those travel nightmares.
Seriously. So like The Press Box is not a podcast that I listen to like on a like, weekly basis. I don't listen to like every new episode that comes out, but I noticed there was an episode with Chris Ryan, who's a writer, blogger, podcaster with The Ringer, who hosts a podcast called The Watch, which is a really great TV podcast. Just like really like hilarious and like very quick-witted like guy who I really enjoy on podcasts. So I saw he was a guest on this Press Box episode, and the Press Box covers media of all types, and he was there to discuss blogging in the early 2000s.
Oh.
And it like because that's like kind of like how he got his start and how he like kind of came up. It was just a really fascinating discussion because I can remember the early 2000s, and I can remember those early 2000s blogs, specifically music and sports blogs, and just like
or Hodinkee.
Yeah, well, I mean, Hodinkee came a little later. Like that was like kind of like a Gen 2 blog, but like
That's
like this is like very early days, and he describes it as just like screaming into the void, and like not getting paid to do any of this writing, and like it's just like a really pure kind of writing,
raw.
Yeah. And I would encourage anyone who can remember that period of time and who was on the internet in the early 2000s to listen to this podcast. I'll leave a link for it in the show notes. Chris Ryan, really funny guy, really good podcast host and guest. And Brian Curtis is a good podcast host. He always asks really good questions. So it's worth a listen. Particularly, I think there's a lot of discussion about like early like MP3 blogs, like music blogs that were like kind of like breaking like indie artists like in the early 2000s, which is sort of like when I had like my peak music curiosity, like at that time when I was, going through college, and yeah, just like really brought back a lot of memories. So yeah, press box.
I'm sold, and I know that you and I are on a similar musical wavelength.
Yeah,
So I will delight in that. Everything you've said, my curiosity is piqued. So
I think you would enjoy this. I think you might even like, there will be like blog names and people mentioned who you will like probably recognize. I'm sure. So
I love anything that takes me back to the early internet.
Yeah, it was a special time. It was a special time. Sometimes I wish we could go back.
It's a blessing and a curse. It allows us to do what we're doing here today and many beautiful aspects of my career. And then other days, I want my MySpace back. So,
yeah. Oh my God, I don't want my MySpace back. That can be left in the past.
Oh, the music! You had to put your music on there.
It was so competitive though with the top friends. That was cruel. Like that should not be. Lots of trauma. Lots of trauma there. All right, what have you got, Cait? What's your cultural rec?
Okay. So I'm going to start with more of my shameless plug and a little more info about me. So I had to come with the most recent book of poetry that I've read. So for those who have not read my bio potentially on Worn and Wound, I am also a poet. I finished my first full-length collection almost 2 years ago at this point, but have kind of dropped the ball on pushing it over the finish line to get published. But one day it will be. So the most recent book of poetry that I've read is called I Do Everything I'm Told by Megan Fernandez. And it was a really lovely read. And if you think you're not a poetry person, I urge you that maybe you are. I actually think this should be the moment for poetry. We have a short attention span. We want things quick. We want things now. Mm-hmm. And poetry delivers that to you.
It really does.
Quickly and efficiently. I think I say this in my bio on your site. That's actually like a parallel that I see between poetry and watches is it's a very small amount of space and people accomplish a lot in that small amount of space. But the other thing that I came with is I came with a movie that I saw recently that I love. And I'm so curious to see if you have seen this movie because in my mind, you are like the movie man.
Okay, yeah.
And so I'm going to be impressed if I've seen something that you haven't seen, or if you have seen it, I'm curious your take. And again, it came out, I think, a few years ago. It's not a new movie. It's called After Sun.
So I haven't seen After Sun. I'm familiar with it. It's on my list. I haven't. It's one of many movies I just haven't had a chance to watch yet. But yeah, tell us about After Sun and why we should check it out.
Okay, I highly, highly recommend. I mean, again, as everyone can tell by now, I'm a little arty. So it is a very, what I appreciated a lot about it was it's a very artistically done film. But basically it is a divorced parents, dad and daughter on summer vacation. And it is shot in a mix of the daughter, and at times the dad is holding the camera, but again, it's 80s, 90s when she was a kid. So some of it is shot through a handheld camera that someone would have had at that time that she was documenting their vacation. But then in other moments, it's professionally shot, the movie was being filmed. And those are meant to be her memories versus the actual footage that was documented of what happened. So there's kind of this push and pull, if we're going to loosely relate it back to watches, of play with time and memory, in that way. And just some incredibly creative work done with perspective and stuff from that point. And again, it's a simple storyline, not super plot driven, character driven about these two individuals. But just really, really beautifully beautifully done and well executed story. And I just really, really enjoyed it and just kind of stumbled upon it. So highly recommend.
Yeah, good recommendation.
Knock it up on your list.
Yeah, no, I'll get around to it now for sure. It's I think the reason I kind of like have stayed away from it is that I was told that it's like sad, like it has like yeah, and I don't know. Sometimes with the state of the world, when I put a movie on, I want to watch. I mean, I could just rewatch like Caddyshack like over and over again. Like that's sort of like my vibe recently, but it's definitely on my radar. This kind of put Paul Mescal on a lot of people's radar. This movie, I think it was the first. I think it was not. I think it was Oscar nominated for this one, if I'm not mistaken. But
it sounds right.
Yeah, kind of like launched him into like another sphere of fame. I think after this movie was released a few years ago. So
I will also say it's not like too sad. Like it definitely has like a somberness to it, and you know, like a single dad and divorce, and like obviously, and you know, and like father and daughter, and like obviously, you know, and she's a little bit like coming of age kind of thing. So like there's inherent complexities there, but it's not like depressing. There's not some like twist ending of something horrible happening. Like, so it's but I totally understand. I mean, I would say much of what I watch in the current landscape is escapism and lightheartedness and silliness.
Yeah. You gotta find a way to escape, and whether it's watches or movies or you know, whatever it is, I think that's important. So
get those dopamine hits where you can. If it's looking down at your wrist at something beautiful, buy that watch.
Yeah, for sure. Cait Bazemore, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been really great to talk to you. We'll have you back on again at some point. I'm sure we got a lot of interesting
now that
things.
We've broken the barrier, like
the floodgates are open.
Yeah.
So, thank you again for making the time, and thank you to all of our listeners for joining us again on the Worn and Wound podcast. We always appreciate it, and we will be back next week with another new episode. Until then, take care.